captain's daughter. And I know we have a couple minutes before we officially start. So this is something I want you to do if you are already listening. I want you to look at this, and I want you to see these great lakes. There's 5 of them that ships usually sail. And I want you to look and see the lake closest to you, which is your lake. This is what I call my lake. That's Lake Superior, the biggest one. Can you name them? Can you find where you are? Let's see. Maybe you live in Madison or Chicago or Detroit or Buffalo or Cleveland or Nebraska. That would not show up here. You might also want to think about, do you have a boat? How big is it? Sailboat? Fishing boat? Or do you just love the water? We'll talk about some of those things. Here's another question. What do you think the big ships we're going to talk about carry for cargo? And where does it come from? What's sailing all about on these Great Lakes? Maybe in addition to the lakes, we should talk about this, because this is really interesting. And where does it go? All the way out to the ocean up here. And can ships go through there? Could a ship actually come in from the ocean down here, through here, up this little river here, this river? We'll talk about this dot. If this dot weren't here, the whole works would not work. Can ships get from here over to here? I have a question. Are we officially on, or is this the prep time? Okay, I'll assume that we're now all on the program. So I'm going to put my ship's hat on again. And I want you to see it says captain. Probably you see it backwards. This was my dad's hat. And it took him 27 years to get this hat, to be a captain. That was a long time. In order to get it to be a captain, he had to be a lot of other things. A deckhand, a third mate, second mate, a wheelsman, really important to get to know how to run the ship. So this could tell you I am the ship captain's daughter when I have that hat on. And I want you to meet him too, so you can see what he looked like. There he is with his hat. Here is also my mother with him in the pilot house at the wheel. Try to see that, the glare. Here, you can see this is our whole family. We were a shipping family. So what about those Great Lakes? Let's look and see if we can name them. Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario. And this is the St. Lawrence River. And in 1959, they connected this to these lakes. So now ships can come from the ocean all the way through up to Duluth and Superior, where I came from, the twin ports. Duluth on this side of the nose and Superior here. And up here is the whole reason for the ship's industry. These are the mines with iron ore that get loaded into the ships here, go all the way across Lake Superior, which it takes about 24 hours, and down through the Soo Locks, which is so important because Lake Superior is 23 or 4 feet higher than these lakes. All these lakes are lower. So the ships have to be lowered down, which takes several hours. Then through the river, which takes about 9 hours. The captain has to be up during all that time, all the close waters and docking he has to do. And then you either turn right, come down Lake Michigan to Chicago, or there's Green Bay, you might be close to that, or down through Lake Huron, down here to Detroit. And guess why they do it? Because all the foundries which make this ore into steel are down here. So this ore gets made into cars and trucks and bridges and so on. So that's what my dad did. He, for 9 months of the year, sailed, and it took him 5.5 days to go down here and get back up again, 6 to get down here. It's a little longer. So that was, our life was geared to the lake. We were people of the lake, and we had a rhythm to our life. It was when the lakes thawed, my father left home, and when they froze, he came back. And that was about 9 months. So how did we live this life in between? Well, in the beginning of my book, this is my book, I summarize this by saying, as the daughter of a Great Lakes ship captain, I grew up to the rhythm of the transport of iron ore. That was the rhythm from the arrival of the shipping orders in March to layup in December, from climbing the ship's ladder weekly to see my father while he was in port, to watching a ship disappear again over the horizon line. My life was dominated by the excitement, the loneliness, the drama, and the lure of the shipping industry and the water. And the lure is something I think is really important and something that makes people want to do this, because you know that it's also dangerous. I bet if you know anything about shipping on the Great Lakes, it's probably about storms. Maybe the sinking of the Fitzgerald, the biggest recent story in shipping history. My father knew the captain. Almost everybody I know knew someone on that ship. So that's what we mostly hear about, I bet. If you have any knowledge of Great Lakes shipping. But I want to tell you what it was like from the inside, from a family's point of view. And I want to start with one of those storms, because everybody does love to hear about a storm. So when I began thinking about writing about our life, it was because of a story my dad told. He was retired, and we were in Tucson, Arizona, and all of a sudden he just looked kind of out into the distance, and this memory came back to him. And he said, it was just after Easter, our first trip upbound in the spring, and we got into a blinding snowstorm above the Sioux. There was a 60-mile-per-hour wind and 20-foot seas, way higher than your house. And we were getting blown farther and farther off course. I'm going to show you a picture. Can you imagine water going over the deck? This is actually his ship. Oh, hard to see. Can you see that big wave? So that was the situation. And then he said, I got out the charts and the big magnifying glass, and I started to look for islands or inlets, reading the small numbers of the chart to check the depth. The closest bay was called Batchewana Bay, but it was not an official shipping area. And it was only a couple miles from where that Fitzgerald went down. It's a very dangerous part of the lake. There were no lines designating shipping lanes anywhere near, but I knew it was our only chance for the lee, which is the place you get out of the wind. The waves were beating up the ship pretty badly, and the hatches were started to take on water. Then I made my decision. I said, it's our only hope. I decided we've got to try for the bay. I knew that when we turned to go in, the wood would hit us broadside and would either ride it out or wouldn't. I got on the intercom and told everyone what we were doing, told them to hang on tight to something, and we started to make the turn. The wind hit us full force on the starboard side. I hung on for dear life to the ship's telegraph as we kept tipping lower and lower until all I could see was water out of the port side. And then we stopped and hovered for a second or two, and a big wave bounced off the rocks and tossed us back the other way, rolling us back over on our starboard side. And under my feet, suddenly felt light, and I said to myself, this is it. We're going over. We just stayed there for a long time. And suddenly, there was a momentary decrease in the wind, and the ship started to come back. And the wave hit us across the stern, and we rode it into the bay. I rang up the chief, who reversed the engines, and the ship finally floated to a stop. We dropped the anchors, and we sat there in a snowstorm all night. When daylight came and the wind had stopped, I saw that the bay was half a whit smaller than it had appeared on the chart, and the ship almost filled it up. We looked how we had come through the rocks in the dark. We had made it, but the crew was not impressed. When we finally got to Duluth, everyone except the officers quit and got off. Their sailing days were over. And then he looked out the door and he said, that was the one time in all my years on Lake Superior that I thought I was going to die. And I thought, oh my gosh, I had never heard him tell this story before, and I never had heard him say he was afraid. And it made me think, why didn't he get off? Why did he do this life? I want you to think about that with me. What was the lure? Okay, well, he did stay, and so this became a part of my life too, because whatever your dad does, you're a part of, right? So when I thought about this life, and I thought about the good parts of it and the really exciting parts, it really made me choose this cover, because this represents me. It's really my daughter watching her grandfather come through the Duluth piers, but it was my experience many times, and it was the best of this life, the very best, because it was so exciting to see him come first a dot on the horizon, then come closer and closer and closer, and then get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then come through and yell down at us, hey mates. So I want to read to you a little bit about what that felt like. Get ready, my mom would say, here he comes. And the tourists at the pier would start running, some out to the lighthouse to watch the great ship enter the canal, and others sat right on the breakwater. Our favorite place was on the walkway by the Marine Museum. We watched proudly as the huge ship glided down the canal to tower above us. "Look up," Mom would say, and there would be Dad. He'd lift up the big black bullhorn with both hands and in a booming voice yell out, "Ahoy, mates! 40 minutes to the dock." And I'd yell back, "Ahoy, Papa." So that was so exciting. And I might say here, this ship is as long as a city block. And it's almost like a little town because in my day, there were 33 men, and they were all men on the ship. And the navigators were in the cabin in the front, and the engineers who did all the mechanical work were in the back. And also in the back, very importantly, was the galley where everyone ate. That is the big thing on a ship. They say a well-fed ship is a well-operating ship. Always there was food, great food back there. But you can imagine the size of this. I think that's really an important thing. And now ships are even bigger. My dad's ship was 690 feet long, and today there are 1,000 footers. 1,000 footers. That is like a football field. So in our town, if you've ever been to Duluth, you can watch the ships actually come through the bridge and go up to the docks where they're going to get their cargo. And then the trick of this, there was land life of this and there was water life. And the land part was that to get aboard the ship to see my dad, we would have to climb a ladder. The ship is like 30 feet tall. And so this is what that was like. When I was young, my dad carried me up. He held me in the curve of his left arm, and with his right hand, he grabbed and let go, and grabbed and let go of the rungs as we went up, lurching every rung. At the top, he turned around and jumped onto the landing and then onto the deck. Oh, it was scary. When I was older, I climbed the ladder by myself, pretending I was brave. My father bragged about it, but guess what? I was nervous about it. And the whole time I was up, I thought about getting down. Because if you looked down, all you could see was this brown water, and you thought, if I fell down there, nobody could save me. So that was a really kind of unique part of the land life. Sometimes he could get off and come home, maybe just for a few hours. Someone would take his place. At this time, he was a first mate, because remember, it took him a while to get to be a captain. But when he got to be a captain, he got certain extra privileges. And they were that he could take his family aboard ship. So my shipping life was really a big part of our family life. And the things I can remember is not that he was gone so much for 9 months, but I remember the times we were together. Because the captain at that time, had the whole first level of the deck up above. And you can see in the background in my study, I should show you this. This is a picture of my dad's ship coming in the canal. It was on a calendar, so I, of course, have it in my study. This is the ship we're talking about that he was a captain of, the Herbert C. Jackson. And this was his very first ship. And you can see this is the historical part, which Wisconsin Historical Society is so great about preserving by having people like me tell my story. It also tells history, because you would never see this anymore. Look, see this black smoke? That means it was coal fired. No, not now, that's for sure. They're diesel. But these had men actually shoveling coal into a huge fire pit and have made this smoke. So these are the size of the ships and the kinds of ships that we're talking about. So when he got to be a captain, he got to take his family on board. as a mate. He could take his wife for maybe a week, but now he could take his whole family. My mother could go for 30 days, and I could take a trip. So that was pretty exciting. And when I got to take my first trip, it was the best because my dad, wanting to make it exciting, let me do all the bells and whistles for the fire drill. And so they practice all the time for, in case they have to get off the ship, they have to know just what to do. So I got to do that, and that was pretty exciting. And then the next really interesting thing is when you're on a ship, time is different. They have watches all night long, every 4 hours. People change their watches, and some people have a watch in the middle of the night. And if the captain is in close waters, he will have to be up all night. So the best thing aboard ship for me was staying up all night when I could in the pilot house. The pilot house is it's right here, the very top of the ship. And that's where the big wheel is, which is now, they no longer use it. They have little joysticks, they call them. But it was exciting because the shortwave radio always jabbered and the men talked, and it was great. So this is a little piece I wrote about that. Nighttime was the best time in the pilot house when the radar direction finder was lit and the two-way radio jabbered with shipping traffic. They would say, I'm in the St. Mary's River, let everybody know the location for everybody else. And the men talked about the news, their families, their childhoods, sports. Everybody drank coffee and ate donuts. That's my memory as a child, that always in the pilot house, they were donuts. I think they lasted a long time. So that was great. There was always a snack up there. And sometimes when it was warm, the doors on either side were latched open, and everyone stopped talking as we sailed in the glow of the moon. All you could hear was the turning of the wheel and the lapping of the water on the bow. One night, Dad bet me I couldn't stay up all night, but I had to try. Right before sunrise, it was deadly quiet, and the night loosened around the edges. The blackness thinned, but it wasn't quite dawn. That's called nautical dawn, that kind of interesting time right before the sun comes up, when the night loosens around the edges, I said. The blackness thinned, not quite light. Maybe you've experienced that. And the smell was different, a little like fish. And now you could see the leftover bacon sandwiches. My dad loved bacon sandwiches from 2 a.m. and how they'd gotten crusty by now on the windowsill, and the fat had hardened. A wind came up, causing a little bounce to the ship. It started to feel humid, and the horizon line became visible, as straight as it had been drawn with a ruler. It was morning, and I had made it. That I remember as a really fun and fond memory. That beautiful, magical night. And we're thinking about the lure. Yes, there are storms. Yes, it's hard work, but there's something about the water, all the dawns, all the sunsets. Sailors work out in nature, and they see northern lights, shooting stars. There's a magical piece to it. So one of the other most exciting things when you're about ship is dinner. Eating is always a big event. And in my day, we don't do this any longer, they had actually the second cook walk all around the ship and rang the dinner bell, the ding, the ding, telling everybody it was time to eat. So I say, in the background, I heard the second cook's dinner bell as he walked around the after cabin and then all the way up forward. I went in and woke up my dad. He was taking a nap. He sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes to get his bearings. And then, after smoothing down his hair, he put on his captain's hat. He put it on to go back to dinner. And his navy blue jacket with 4 gold stripes. That's how you know a person is the captain, with 4 gold stripes. Whoops, I lost you here. Okay, so I felt proud of him as I walked back, and I felt proud to be the ship captain's daughter. He took his place at the head of the table in front of the buffet, with the mirror reflecting the plates of cherry cobbler, which were already set out for dessert. I sat in the first mate's place to his right, and all the rest of the mates had moved down one place to make room for me. And the wheelsman, who would normally sit at the end of the captain's table, went to eat in the mess hall, another part of the kitchen, for the next 5 days of my trip. The second cook, who was also the waiter, asked my dad how he would like his liver. It was their standard joke. My dad said what he always said, over the side. He did not like liver. Everyone laughed. Dinner that night was roast beef, served on an oval platter with carrots and peas in little individual round dishes, all bearing the company flag and the initials PEM for Pecan Mather Company, which was his company. In another little round dish, there was an ice cream scoop-sized ball of mashed potatoes. I'm going to show you. This is, the ship had its own china. This is the cup. You can see the flag. The saucer had it also. So this is how you got your coffee. The plates were the same. The conversation was between the crew. The chief, Mr. Tucker, was seated to Dad's left so they could talk. And he talked about his daughters, who were a year older and a year younger than I was. And everybody talked about the load and how someone's finger had gotten cut on a wire cable. After dinner, we walked forward to Dad's quarters, laughing as we watched the seagulls trying to catch a ride on the mast. We climbed up to the second deck, making the steel rungs ring under our feet. And when we turned on the TV, it was all snowy. At that time, it was almost, you could only really watch television in port. And then it was time for bed. Sure nice having you here, Dolly, Dad said. And then he went into his room on the starboard side, and I went to the guest quarters on the port side. So that was my first trip alone with my dad. By this time, I was older. The first time I went with my mom, but now I got to go alone. So I want to show you a little bit. When I was aboard ship, when I was younger, I hope you can see this. These were my companions. You could see them here. We're out on deck, just talking. I have a dress on. And they let me help. You can see I have a broom. I'm sweeping the deck. So these were my pals aboard ship. Sometimes people talk about sailors in a way that's maybe not so complimentary. And I tell you, the sailors I knew were dads and uncles and brothers of people. They were all interesting, and they were all so nice to me. So after a while, I got to be older. As my story goes on, I get older and older, and I went away. I was in college, and I went away to study in Paris. And I was a French major, and I was gone a long time, and I didn't get to go aboard ship with my dad that summer. So the next summer, I was really kind of too old, because there was an age limit on the times that you had to be 12 in my day. And then when you were 18, your sailing days were kind of over. It was expected you would go on and get into your own life. But my dad fixed it up so I could take one last trip with him. And that was just the best. So when I got back aboard ship, I was in now the lovely passenger quarters, because they did take passengers. A lot of times the people who owned these ships are really important in shipping got to take a ride. So when they weren't there, I got to stay in those quarters. So this is my last trip. We looked out the porthole in the deep darkness. It's night now. And then we went to bed. I pulled back the floral bedspread in the fancy passenger quarters and crawled under the quilt and was just falling asleep when I could feel the ship starting to toss up and down restlessly. I heard the plastic glass in the bathroom fall off the sink and roll across the floor and hit the wall. The wind had shifted. Holding on to the end of the bed and then reaching for the chair to keep my balance, I opened the screen door and stole out to the bow to feel the cooling air. I looked down, so far down. The waves curled against us as we divided them with our bow, now lifting us up a few feet and then dropping us back down again, before continuing their ride along the hull. When they hit the back cabin, the lights on the stack blurred in the spray. Up, down, clouds hiding the moon. No lights of any ships around us. No sound except for the rhythmic boom and swish of the water. I was sailing again. And it felt reminiscent and great. So that night, the next day, the wind called down and it was lovely. And then that night, this is what happened. The moon came up and we began to see the outlines in the distance of several ships starting to get in line to go through the river leading up to the Sioux. That means Dad was up in the pilot house, as he had to be, to go through that little part of the Sioux locks that connected us to everything else. And I was up there with him, for sure. So the moon came up, and we began to see the outlines in the distance of several ships starting to get in line to go through the river leading up to the Sioux locks. Standing out on the bow, Dad made me look for the North Star, just to make sure I remembered how to find true north. Since ancient times, he said, Polaris, the other name for the North Star, has been the sailor's star. We now have modern navigational devices, such as a gyro compass and GPS, but those depend on human power sources that can fail. The North Star never goes out, he laughed. It's still a sailor's best friend. He pointed out Cassiopeia, important because it's one of the constellations that is visible year-round in the northern sky, so it's also the sailor's friend. We stood there silently in a bowl of stars. The ship rocked gently in the night wind. It's so awesome out here, I said. It feels like we're floating in time and space. We are, Dolly, he said, still gazing upward. We are. So I want you to think about, when we were thinking about the lure, what keeps a person doing this? If you have a dream to be a ship captain, as my dad did growing up on the lake, you probably don't ever really think about all the really hard times. And they do come. There are storms for sure, but there's something about it, something about the lure of the water that maybe you have felt too, that kept him there and that keeps sailors and mariners sailing. And there's a great quote that a writer who writes all about ships and the water used that I think is really good for closing. And he said, and I'm going to show you. Let's see if I can show you. Here's my dad. Here's the quote underneath there in the book. You can see on his sleeve 4 stripes. That's what means he's a captain. If you're a first mate, you have 3 stripes. Second mate, 2 stripes. Third mate, 1 stripe. So this is what I think sums it up for a ship captain and a ship captain's daughter and even ship captain's wife. The experience of command of a ship at sea is unforgettable. It is without parallel or equal. The responsibility is heavy, but the rewards, which become embedded in the very fabric of your life, are priceless. So I got to reap those rewards too by sailing with my dad. So this is me when I was young, and this is me when I was older, watching his ship come in because it's still sailing. Most of the ships are a lot larger, but they kept this one because it can get into smaller ports. So it's still useful and still sailing. And I saw it. This is several years ago in Duluth. I was there, and just by chance, it came through the pier. So I had the same experience, that thrill of watching this ship come through. So I hope that you get to see one of these big ships one of these days, and that when you do, you'll have a little bit of a feeling of what it's like to be a sailor on them and a shipping family. So now I have a little activity for you. First of all, to look up the North Star and see if you can find it. And if you can find it, you can say, I'll never get lost. That'll keep my direction straight. And then this may look very silly, but when you think about it, you think, how in the world does a ship like this with tons of iron ore or coal or wheat in it, how did they stay afloat? Why don't they just sink if you put all that heavy tonnage in there? Well, that's a really fascinating question because it's called buoyancy. There's some amazing scientific reason that when a ship pushes down on the water pushes back up. By the same weight that pushes down, pushes back up. It's called buoyancy. And I don't pretend to understand all about it, but I do know that it's a fact because that's why ships sail or can. So this is a really, really simple experiment that you can do to test that out. And it's simple. This is tinfoil. If you just take a piece of tinfoil, and this is the important part, to curl the edges so you have edges. Otherwise, water will leak in. If you bend up the edges and you put it in water, at least 3 inches of water, okay, so it's floating on there, and then you put like an orange in there or an apple, which is kind of heavy, and see if it still floats. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it will, because that's the point of it. And put as many things in there as you can to see how long it will stay afloat. So that's my story, and I thank Wisconsin for being interested in it and letting me share it. And I think everyone who's done one of these story times will say, you write your story too. Everybody has a story. And you know what? The longer it lasts, the more it becomes part of history. So I want to say not only ahoy, but wishing you good sailing. One old sailor that I knew would always say, wishing you fair winds and a following sea, and stay between the buoys. So thank you for listening and have a really good day. Bye-bye.